Hello and welcome to Understanding Anxiety with Neil Robson, the podcast. I'm Neil Robson, a hypnotherapist at Faversham Hypnotherapy, where I work with people both online and here in Kent to help them overcome anxiety, panic attacks and overthinking. All sorts of anxiety. So today, I'd like to talk about something that feels completely natural when you're anxious. And in fact, it feels like common sense, really. It's something almost every one of us would do. And yet it's one of the biggest reasons anxiety can quietly grow over time. And today we're going to be talking about avoidance. So let me introduce you to Sarah. Sarah has her first panic attack while shopping in a supermarket. Now, it comes out of nowhere. Her heart races, she feels dizzy, her breathing becomes shallow, and she genuinely believes she's about to collapse. Eventually, she gets help, she gets outside, she sits in her car, and slowly the panic begins to settle. She feels well enough to drive, so she drives home, and she has this one overwhelming thought: I never want to feel like that again. So, a week later, she needs to go shopping again. Now, without really thinking about it, she chooses the smaller shop instead of the big supermarket. It feels safer. Nothing bad happens. Her brain breathes a sigh of relief. Good decision, it tells itself. A few weeks later, she's invited into the town centre, and she makes an excuse. It's too busy. And again, she feels this relief. So, a few months pass, and now she only shops locally. She avoids crowds. She avoids queues. She avoids anywhere she thinks she might feel trapped. Her world has shrinked. Not because she's weak, not because she's lazy in any way, not because she's choosing anxiety. She's simply doing what every human brain has evolved to do: avoid danger. Now, the problem is her brain has made a mistake. It isn't avoiding danger, it's avoiding discomfort. And those are two very different things. See, when our ancestors avoided a hungry lion, avoidance kept them alive. The brain learnt that place is dangerous. Avoid it again. Fine. Perfect. And that's exactly how survival works. But anxiety changes the rules. So instead of learning from genuine danger, it starts learning from anxious feelings. If you leave the supermarket every time you feel anxious, your brain doesn't think, oh, anxiety's past now. It thinks leaving saved us. And that's a powerful lesson. Next time you walk towards a supermarket, what do you think your brain is going to remind you of or remember? It's going to be danger. Not because supermarkets are dangerous, because your previous escape appeared to keep you safe. And this is the thing. That's how the avoidance cycle begins. It's incredibly logical. You feel anxious, you leave, you feel relief. Your brain joins the dots. So leaving equals safety. So next time, it encourages you to leave even sooner, then sooner still. And eventually the anxiety starts before you've even left the house. And not because the world has become more dangerous in any way, but because your brain has become more protective. So one of the biggest misunderstandings about anxiety is that people think avoidance proves something. If I couldn't stay there, it must have been too much for me. Well, actually, the opposite is often true. Avoidance doesn't prove something was dangerous. It simply proves that leaving reduced your anxiety in that moment. And your brain, it's always paying attention to what reduces anxiety because it believes it's helping you. And the really difficult part is this. Avoidance actually works, at least for a little while. The moment you decide not to go, you feel better. The moment you cancel some plans, you relax. And the moment you drive home, instead of carrying on, your heart slows down, You feel that relief. But just like we talked about in the last episode with reassurance, short-term relief can create a long-term problem. Every time avoidance reduces anxiety, it teaches your brain that one lesson. You escaped, didn't you, just in time? And the brain never gets the chance to discover what would have happened if you'd stayed. And that means it never learns the most important lesson of all, that you were actually capable of doing it in the first place. Now, the interesting thing about avoidance is that it rarely stays in one area of your life. It has a habit of spreading. Let's go back to Sarah for a moment. At first, it was just one supermarket. Then it became all supermarkets. Then busy shopping centres. Then anywhere with long queues. And eventually, she started avoiding places that she'd always enjoyed going to. Not because the places had changed, but because her brain had quietly added them to its list of possible dangers. And this is how anxiety slowly shrinks people's world. Doesn't usually happen overnight. It happens one small decision at a time. I'll go another day. I'll stay at home tonight. I'll let someone else drive. I'll order online instead. It's easier and safer. Each decision makes perfect sense in the moment. And each one brings that familiar feeling of relief and safety. And that's why avoidance is such a powerful thing. Because it works. It removes the anxiety. Or at least it feels as if it does. But what's actually disappeared here? Has the danger gone? Or has the opportunity to prove yourself wrong disappeared as well? That's a very different question. Avoidance isn't limited to places. Sometimes we avoid conversations. Perhaps you've been meaning to make an important phone call. You put it off until tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. The anxiety grows. The phone call becomes an even bigger mountain to climb. Sometimes we can avoid people. Someone invites us out. We say we're busy, not because we don't want to see them, but because we're worried we're going to feel anxious. Perhaps we'll have a panic attack. Perhaps we'll embarrass ourselves. So we stay at home. Again, the anxiety settles. The brain says, well done. Good decision that was. But the next invitation feels even harder. And some people begin avoiding exercise because it makes their heart beat faster. Others avoid travelling too far from home. Some avoid motorways. Others avoid lifts or trains or airplanes. Some people stop eating in restaurants because they're frightened they'll feel trapped. Others avoid speaking up in meetings because they're afraid they're going to say something wrong. And although these situations are completely different, the brain is doing exactly the same thing every time. It's trying to keep you safe. The trouble is, it's become overprotective. Imagine you had an overprotective friend, and every time you wanted to do something new, they said, don't go, something might happen. You'd be safer staying here. And eventually, you probably stopped doing quite a lot. Not because you wanted to, because someone kept convincing you that the risk was too great. And that's what an anxious brain can become. An overprotective friend. Always trying to help, always trying to prevent this discomfort with anxiety. The irony is that by trying so hard to protect you, it stops you discovering how capable you really are. And there's another important point here. Avoidance doesn't just apply to situations. Sometimes we avoid feelings. We can distract ourselves all the time. We keep the television on. We scroll through our phones. We stay busy every minute of the day. Not because any of those things are bad, but because silence gives anxiety room to speak. Sometimes we avoid memories. We can avoid thoughts. Sometimes we even avoid noticing how we're actually feeling. And again, it all makes sense. If something feels uncomfortable, why wouldn't we want to get away from it? But because every time we run from anxiety, the anxiety starts believing it must be something worth running from. Imagine meeting a harmless dog every morning, and every time you see it, you cross the road. And after a while, your brain begins to assume there must be a reason for this. If I always avoid the dog, perhaps it is really dangerous. Nothing about the dog's changed, only your behaviour has. And behaviour is one of the ways the brain decides what's safe and what isn't. And this is why recovery from anxiety often feels, a little bit confusing. People can say, I've been avoiding these situations because they make me anxious. But often they continue to make them anxious because they've been avoided. See what I mean? That's a difficult idea to accept at first, but it's hopeful as well, because if avoidance helped teach the brain to be afraid, new experiences can teach it something completely different. So, what can we do about it? If avoidance is keeping anxiety alive, then the first thing I'd say is recovery isn't about forcing yourself into the most frightening situation that you can imagine, all right? It's not about proving how brave you are. And it certainly isn't about pretending you're not anxious. Recovery is about giving your brain new experiences so it can learn. So let's go back to Sarah one last time. Imagine she decides she's never going back to the supermarket. 5 years pass. What does her brain believe now? It believes supermarkets must be incredibly dangerous. After all, she's avoided them for 5 years, right? So from the brain's point of view, that must mean the danger is real. Now imagine something different. Sarah decides to drive to the supermarket. She doesn't even go inside. She simply parks outside for 5 minutes. Her anxiety rises. Her brain is saying, screaming, let's go home. But she stays. Nothing terrible happens. The anxiety begins to settle. So a few days later, she goes back. This time, she walks through the entrance. Again, her anxiety rises. Again, nothing terrible happens. Next week, she buys one item. Then she leaves. Slowly, something remarkable begins to happen. Her brain starts collecting new evidence. Not evidence that anxiety disappears, but evidence that she can cope with the anxiety. And that's a huge difference. Many people think recovery means never feeling anxious again. And I don't think that's the right goal here. The goal is to stop being frightened of anxiety itself. Because once you're no longer afraid of the feeling, it loses a lot of its power. Your brain starts to realize this feeling is uncomfortable, but it isn't dangerous. My life's not in danger here. That lesson can't usually be learnt by thinking. It has to be learnt by experience. And every time you stay a little longer than your anxiety wanted you to, you're teaching your brain something new. Every time you make the phone call instead of putting it off, you're teaching your brain. Every time you accept an invitation instead of counselling, you're teaching your brain. Every time you do that drive, that go onto that one junction further, walk a little further, stay in the queue a little longer, or allow yourself to feel anxious without immediately escaping, you're giving your nervous system the opportunity to update its information. So think back to when you first learnt to drive. At the beginning, every roundabout felt complicated. Every gear change needed conscious thought. Every journey felt stressful. But after enough repetition, your brain stopped treating driving as something dangerous or unfamiliar, and it became normal. And anxiety recovery works in much the same way. The brain learns through experience, not once, not twice, but over time, repetition. This is why I always encourage people to celebrate progress rather than, trying to get that perfection. Small shifts. Perhaps today you stayed in the supermarket for 2 minutes longer than last week. That's progress. Perhaps you answered that phone instead of letting it ring. That's progress. Perhaps you went out for a coffee even though you felt anxious. That's progress. Recovery is rarely this massive giant leap. It's usually all these hundreds of tiny little victories that gradually change the way your brain sees the world. And here's something I'd like you to really remember here. Feeling anxious doesn't mean you're failing. Very often it means you're doing something that gives your brain the chance to learn. The anxiety isn't proof that you're getting worse. And that's important. Sometimes it's proof that you're challenging that old pattern. So, as we finish today, I'd like to leave you with one question. Where has anxiety persuaded you to make your world smaller? And what's one small step you could take this week to gently begin making it bigger again? Not the biggest step, not the scariest step, just the next step, because that's how your confidence grows. Not all at once, but one experience at a time. So thank you for listening to me today, waffle on. Hope this episode has helped you understand why avoidance feels so helpful in the moment, but quietly it allows anxiety to get stronger over time. So for more practical help, listen and follow to Understanding Anxiety with Neil Robson, the podcast. And if you'd like one-to-one support, I work with clients online and from my practice at Faversham Hypnotherapy in Kent, and you can just check the website out. So until next time, stay well.